It was a chilly Monday morning when Maria pushed open the glass doors of Orientech, a prestigious tech company known for its cutting-edge innovation and its towering office building downtown. Dressed in her usual uniform, blue coveralls, sturdy work shoes, and a warm smile, Maria walked through the bustling lobby, a mop bucket trailing behind her. The morning rush was in full swing, with employees in tailored suits and sleek dresses chatting over coffee or swiping their badges at the turnstiles. No one paid her much attention as usual. To them, she was invisible, just another cleaning lady. Maria had been working at Orientech for nearly a decade. She knew every inch of the building better than most of the employees who walked its halls. She knew which desks were always messy, which offices held the most heated meetings, and who left their coffee cups behind without a second thought. Maria wasn't just cleaning floors and emptying trash cans. She was observing, listening, and quietly learning about the people who worked there. Despite her unassuming presence, Maria carried herself with a quiet dignity, a deep intelligence, and a sharp wit that few people ever got to see. Today, however, Maria felt a weight in the air. Something was different. As she rolled her cart toward the elevators, snippets of conversation floated her way. "Did you hear about the CEO's latest stunt?" One man whispered to his colleague. "I know," the woman replied, shaking her head. "He's gone too far this time. The staff cuts, the budget slashes. It's like he doesn't care about anyone but himself." Maria didn't react outwardly, but she made a mental note. There had been murmurs about Orientech's CEO, Mr. Carter Langston, for weeks now. Known for his ruthless business tactics and larger-than-life ego, Langston had turned the company into a billion-dollar empire. But his success had come at a cost. Layoffs, pay cuts, and a toxic work environment had left many employees resentful and fearful. As Maria stepped into the service elevator, she thought back to the few times she had crossed paths with Langston. He was the kind of man who'd never looked twice at someone like her. She remembered the time he brushed past her in the hallway, barking orders into his phone, nearly knocking her mop out of her hands without so much as an apology. Reaching the top floor, Maria began her routine. The executive floor was always immaculate, yet Maria took extra care here. It was quiet, almost eerily so, with its glass walls and sleek furniture. As she wiped down the long conference table in the boardroom, she caught sight of a schedule left behind on one of the chairs. Her eyes scanned the bold letters. "Emergency board meeting, 10 o'clock am." Her brow furrowed. Emergency meetings were rare, and from what she'd overheard, the company was already in turmoil. She carefully placed the schedule back where she'd found it and finished tidying up. Just as she was about to leave, she heard the sound of voices approaching. The door swung open, and a group of executives walked in, their expensive shoes clicking against the polished floor. Maria instinctively stepped aside, head down, but she couldn't help overhearing their conversation. "Langston is out of control," one of them muttered. "This meeting is going to be a bloodbath. Do you really think he'll listen to reason?" Another replied. "He's never cared about anyone's opinion but his own." Maria quietly pushed her cart out of the room, her mind racing. It wasn't her place to get involved, she reminded herself. She was just the cleaning lady. Yet, as she walked down the hallway, she couldn't shake the feeling that today was going to be different. Life-changing, even. By mid-morning, Maria was back in the janitor's closet, sorting supplies, when the boardroom erupted in heated voices. She could hear them through the thin walls, accusations, demands, and Langston's unmistakable voice booming over the rest. "You think you can tell me how to run my company?" he thundered. "I built this empire from the ground up. If you don't like it, there's a door." Maria sighed, shaking her head. She'd heard enough stories about Langston's temper to know this meeting wasn't going to end well. But then, just as quickly as the shouting began, there was silence. An unnerving, heavy silence. Moments later, the door to the janitor's closet creaked open. Maria looked up, startled, to find one of the executives standing there. It was Mr. Bennett, the company's CEO, a kind man who always greeted her with a smile. "Maria," he said, his voice low and urgent, We need your help." Maria blinked, confused. "My help? What can I do?" Bennett stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Langston has crossed the line. We've been discussing ways to address it for weeks, but now it's clear. We need to act. And you're the only one who can help us pull this off." Maria's heart raced. "Me? I'm just the cleaning lady." Bennett gave her a knowing look. "You're much more than that, Maria. We've all seen it. You know this company better than anyone. You've been here longer than most of us. And more importantly, you're the one person Langston would never see coming." Maria stared at him, her mind spinning. Was this some kind of joke? What could she possibly do against someone like Langston? Yet, as she looked into Bennett's eyes, she saw something she hadn't seen in a long time. Hope. Before she could respond, the sound of footsteps echoed down the hall. Bennett straightened, nodding to her. "Think about it," he whispered before slipping out of the room. Maria stood there, clutching the mop handle tightly. Her mind was a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions. For years, she had watched from the sidelines, invisible to the powerful people around her. But now it seemed the tables were turning. Little did she know the events that were about to unfold in the boardroom would not only change the course of the company's future, but would also force Maria to step into a role she never imagined she'd play. And when the dust settled, one thing would be clear. Maria wasn't just the cleaning lady. She was the key to a revolution. But how could she possibly fire the CEO? Maria leaned against the wall, her heart pounding as she tried to make sense of what had just happened. Bennett's words echoed in her mind. Asterisk, you're the one person Langston would never see coming. Asterisk, she shook her head, trying to dismiss the absurdity of the idea. She wasn't a strategist or a corporate big shot. She was just a woman with a mop and a paycheck to earn. But the urgency in Bennett's voice lingered, refusing to be ignored. The janitor's closet felt stifling now, so Maria stepped out into the hallway. The tension in the air seemed thicker than before. Employees passed by in hurried steps, their faces taut with worry. Everyone seemed on edge, as if they were bracing for an unseen storm. Maria noticed small details she hadn't paid attention to before: the whispered conversations, the way people avoided eye contact, the nervous glances toward the executive floor. She returned to her cart and began wiping down surfaces in the break room, her hands moving on autopilot. Her mind, however, was far from the task at hand. Memories of her years at Orientech started bubbling to the surface. Maria had taken the cleaning job out of necessity when her husband had fallen ill years ago. At the time, it was supposed to be temporary, a way to make ends meet until she found something better. But life had a way of throwing curveballs. Her husband's condition worsened, hospital bills piled up, and before she knew it, years had passed. The job had become her anchor, a steady if unglamorous constant in an otherwise chaotic life. She thought back to her first day on the job. Back then, the company had been smaller, almost family-like. Employees had been friendly, and the CEO at the time, a man named Richard Carlisle, had treated everyone with respect, regardless of their title. Maria had even caught him thanking the janitorial staff after a late-night meeting. But when Langston had taken over 5 years ago, everything changed. Langston had been hailed as a visionary, the kind of leader who could take the company to the next level. And he had. Profits soared, the stock price skyrocketed, and Orientech became a household name. But behind the glossy headlines, there was a darker story. Layoffs became a regular occurrence, benefits were slashed, and employees were expected to work longer hours with fewer resources. Langston ruled with an iron fist, and anyone who dared to question him was quickly shown the door. Maria had watched it all unfold quietly, her position offering her a front-row seat to the company's transformation. She had seen the hopeful new hires turn disillusioned within months, their smiles replaced by exhaustion. She had heard the whispered complaints, the muffled sobs in empty offices late at night. But she had also learned something important over the years. People like Langston thrived on fear, and fear was a powerful silencer. As she scrubbed a particularly stubborn coffee stain, Maria's thoughts were interrupted by a pair of voices entering the break room. It was 2 junior employees, their conversation hushed but urgent. "Did you hear what happened in the boardroom?" one of them asked. The other shook her head, her eyes wide. "No, but I heard Langston was screaming at them again. He's such a tyrant. I can't believe HR hasn't done anything." HR. The first one scoffed. "They're too scared of him to do anything. I heard he threatened to fire Bennett last week just for suggesting we revisit the budget cuts." Maria pretended not to listen as she wiped the counter nearby, but her ears were sharp. "Well, he's bound to slip up eventually," the second one said. "Nobody can keep up that kind of behavior forever. Maybe today's the day." "Yeah, right," the first one replied bitterly. "People like Langston don't get what they deserve. They just keep winning, no matter how many people they hurt." The conversation hit Maria harder than she expected. She had always believed that actions had consequences, that justice would eventually find its way. But as she thought about Langston, she realized just how much he had gotten away with over the years. Finishing up in the break room, Maria pushed her cart toward the elevator again. She was halfway down the hallway when she spotted Bennett talking to a small group of executives near the boardroom door. They were speaking in low voices, their faces tense. Maria hesitated for a moment, then turned into a nearby office to avoid being seen. From there, she could just make out bits of their conversation. "Can't let him do this," one of the executives said, her voice trembling. "He's going to ruin the company." "He's already ruined the company," another replied. "The question is whether we have the guts to stop him." Bennett ran a hand through his hair, looking exhausted. "We've got one shot at this, and we need to be smart about it. If we confront him directly, he'll shut us down before we even get a chance to explain." Maria's curiosity was piqued. What exactly were they planning? And why had Bennett approached her? The whole situation felt surreal, like she had accidentally stepped into someone else's story. But the more she thought about it, the more she realized how much she cared. She had spent years cleaning up the messes left behind by people like Langston, literal and figurative, and it was starting to wear on her. Maybe this was her chance to do something about it. By the time Maria returned to the janitor's closet, she had made up her mind. She wasn't sure what Bennett and the others had in mind, but if there was a way to help, she was willing to try. She didn't have a lot of power or influence, but she did have one thing: knowledge. Maria knew every corner of the building, every department, every person. She knew who was loyal to Langston and who wasn't. She knew where the files were kept, where the surveillance cameras were located, and how to move around unnoticed. It wasn't much, but it was something. As she gathered her supplies for the next round of cleaning, she caught sight of her reflection in the small mirror on the wall. For the first time in years, she didn't just see a cleaning lady staring back at her. She saw someone who had the power to make a difference. The sound of footsteps approaching snapped her out of her thoughts. She turned just as Bennett appeared in the doorway, his expression a mix of determination and desperation. "Maria," he said, his voice steady but urgent, "have you made a decision?" She hesitated for only a moment before nodding. "I don't know what you need me to do, but I'm in." Bennett's shoulders relaxed slightly, and for the first time he smiled. "Thank you," he said. "You won't regret this." Maria wasn't so sure about that. But as she followed him down the hallway, her heart pounding in her chest, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was about to be part of something much bigger than herself. Maria followed Bennett down the hallway, the sound of their footsteps muffled by the plush carpet. Her palms felt clammy as she gripped the handle of her cart, her mind racing with questions. What exactly was she agreeing to? Could she trust Bennett? And most of all, what would Langston do if he found out? Bennett led her into a small conference room tucked away in a quieter corner of the building. Inside, 3 other executives were seated around a table, their faces tense and wary. Maria recognized them: Ms. Harper, the head of HR, Mr. Patel, the chief financial officer, and Ms. Clark, the legal counsel. All of them looked up as Maria and Bennett entered, their expressions a mixture of surprise and relief. "This is Maria," Bennett said, gesturing toward her. "She's agreed to help." The room fell silent for a moment, and Maria felt a wave of self-consciousness. She was painfully aware of her uniform, her mop bucket, and the years of invisibility that had defined her life at Orientech. But then Miss Harper stood up and extended her hand. "Thank you for being here, Maria," she said warmly. "We need all the help we can get." Maria shook her hand, grateful for the kindness. "I'm not sure how much help I'll be," she admitted. "I don't know anything about corporate politics." "You know more than you think," Miss Clark said, her voice calm but firm. "You've been here longer than any of us. You've seen things we haven't. And most importantly, Langston doesn't see you as a threat. That gives you an advantage we don't have." Maria nodded slowly, trying to absorb the gravity of their words. She took a seat at the table, feeling both out of place and oddly included. For the first time, she wasn't just a bystander in the company's drama. She was part of it. Bennett cleared his throat and leaned forward, his hands clasped tightly together. "Here's the situation," he began. "Langston's actions have been hurting this company for years, but the last few months have been catastrophic. He's made reckless decisions, alienated key clients, and driven out some of our best employees. And now, with these latest budget cuts, he's jeopardizing the entire future of Orientech." Maria listened intently as the others chimed in, filling in the details. Langston had recently pushed through a series of drastic cost-cutting measures, slashing departments to the bone and selling off valuable assets. The moves had boosted short-term profits, but they had left the company vulnerable. Worse, he had dismissed any objections from the board, insisting that his vision was infallible. "The board is split," Ms. Harper explained. "Some members are loyal to Langston because he's made them a lot of money. But others are starting to see the damage he's doing. The problem is, no one has the courage to stand up to him." "That's where we come in," Bennett said. "We've been working quietly to gather evidence, emails, financial records, legal documents, anything that shows a pattern of misconduct. We're building a case to present to the board. But we need more. And that's where you come in, Maria." Maria frowned, her brow furrowing. "What can I do? I don't have access to any of that." "No," Bennett admitted, "but you have access to places we don't. Langston keeps his private office locked, but you clean it regularly. If there are documents, files, or anything else he's hiding, you might be able to find them." Maria felt a knot tighten in her stomach. The idea of snooping through Langston's office was terrifying. He wasn't the kind of man who took betrayal lightly, and if she got caught. "You don't have to decide right now," Miss Clark said gently, sensing Maria's hesitation. "But if you're willing to help, you can make a real difference. Not just for us, but for everyone at this company." Maria looked around the table, seeing the desperation in their faces. These weren't just executives protecting their jobs. They were people fighting to save something they believed in. And while Maria had always thought of herself as a bystander, she realized she had a choice. She could continue to stand on the sidelines, or she could step up and take a risk. "I'll do it," she said finally, her voice steady despite the fear bubbling inside her. "I'll help." The relief in the room was palpable. Bennett nodded, gratitude etched into his face. "Thank you, Maria. You have no idea how much this means." Over the next hour, they laid out a plan. Maria would start by keeping her eyes open during her cleaning rounds, paying attention to anything unusual in Langston's office. They would also give her a small recording device to carry discreetly, just in case she overheard anything useful. The goal was to gather enough evidence to present a compelling case to the board. As the meeting wrapped up, Maria felt a mix of emotions. Fear, yes, but also a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in years. She wasn't just cleaning up after people anymore. She was part of something bigger, something that might actually make a difference. That evening, as she cleaned Langston's office, Maria's hands trembled slightly. The room was immaculate, as always, with its sleek black desk, leather chair, and towering shelves of books and awards. Everything about it screamed power and control. But as she dusted the desk, her eyes caught something. A folder tucked partially under a stack of papers. The tab read, "Confidential." Maria hesitated, her heart pounding in her chest. She glanced toward the door, ensuring it was closed, before carefully sliding the folder free. Inside were several documents, each stamped with the company's logo and marked with bold red letters, for internal use only. She skimmed the pages quickly, her breath catching as she realized what she was looking at. Financial records, internal memos, and correspondence, all pointing to shady deals and questionable practices Langston had tried to keep hidden. This was exactly the kind of evidence Bennett and the others needed. Maria snapped a quick photo of the documents with the small camera Bennett had given her, then carefully placed the folder back where she found it. She finished cleaning the office with shaking hands, her mind racing. This was just the beginning, she realized. The stakes were higher than she had imagined, and the risks were real. As she pushed her cart back toward the elevator, Maria couldn't help but glance over her shoulder, half expecting Langston to appear out of nowhere. The building felt eerily quiet, the fluorescent lights casting long shadows across the empty halls. She told herself to stay calm, to focus on the bigger picture. But deep down, she knew that the storm was far from over. Maria couldn't sleep that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Langston's sharp glare or imagined herself being dragged out of the building by security. The documents she'd found weighed heavily on her mind. It was clear that Langston had been hiding things, but she had no idea how deep his actions went. And now she was part of the effort to bring him down. A cleaning lady thrust into the middle of a corporate rebellion. The next morning, the office was buzzing with an unusual energy. Maria could feel it as soon as she walked through the doors. People moved quickly, their conversations clipped and hushed. It wasn't the usual workplace chatter. It was something heavier, charged with tension. Even the air seemed thicker, as if everyone was holding their breath. Maria went about her rounds as usual, her cart rattling softly in the quiet hallways, but her senses were heightened, her ears attuned to every sound. She had memorized the instructions from Bennett and the others. Act normal, don't draw attention to yourself, and keep an eye out for anything suspicious. As she passed by the executive suite, Maria noticed Langston's office door was ajar. It was rare for him to leave it open, and her heart skipped a beat. Peeking in cautiously, she saw his assistant, Emily, hurriedly packing papers into a briefcase. Emily looked frazzled, her usually composed demeanor replaced by frantic movements. Maria cleared her throat, pretending she had just arrived to clean. Emily jumped, clutching a folder to her chest. "Oh, Maria," she said, her voice strained. "You startled me." "Sorry about that," Maria said, pushing her cart into the room. "Do you need me to come back later?" No, Emily said quickly. "I'm almost done." She shoved the folder into the briefcase and snapped it shut. "Langston's in a meeting, so you should be fine to clean." Maria nodded, keeping her expression neutral. As Emily gathered her things and left, Maria felt a chill run down her spine. Something was definitely happening. Emily had always been composed, a loyal assistant who never let her guard down. For her to be this rattled meant whatever Langston was dealing with was serious. Maria worked quickly, her eyes scanning the room for anything out of place. She couldn't risk lingering too long, but her gut told her there was more to uncover. Then, just as she was about to leave, she noticed a small USB drive sitting on the edge of the desk. It wasn't there the night before, and it looked out of place. Her heart pounded as she reached for it, slipping it into her pocket before wheeling her cart out of the office. Back in the janitor's closet, Maria closed the door and pulled out the USB drive. She didn't have a computer to check its contents, but she knew it had to be important. She decided to bring it to Bennett and the others immediately. If Langston or Emily realized it was missing, there wouldn't be much time. The meeting with Bennett's group that evening was tense. Maria handed over the USB drive, and Miss Clark plugged it into her laptop. The room fell silent as the files loaded, revealing spreadsheets, emails, and internal memos. Maria could feel the weight of their expressions as they scrolled through the data. "This is it," Miss Clark said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "This is exactly what we needed." Bennett leaned over her shoulder, his face grim. "These are off-the-books accounts," he said, pointing to a series of transactions. He's been funneling money into shell companies. This isn't just bad management, it's fraud. The room erupted into quiet but urgent discussions. Maria sat back, her hands trembling slightly. She had expected to find something incriminating, but this was beyond what she had imagined. Fraud was a serious crime, and if Langston was exposed, it wouldn't just mean losing his job. It could mean jail time. "What do we do now?" Maria asked, her voice cutting through the chatter. Bennett turned to her, his expression resolute. "We take this to the board. They have a meeting tomorrow, and we need to present this before Langston gets a chance to cover his tracks." Maria felt a wave of nerves. She wasn't sure how she fit into the next steps, but the stakes were higher than ever. If they failed, Langston would tighten his grip on the company, and anyone involved in the rebellion would likely face retaliation. The next day, Maria went about her routine with a newfound sense of purpose. She kept her head down, but her ears were sharp, catching snippets of conversations that hinted at growing unrest among employees. It seemed word of Langston's mismanagement was spreading, though no one dared to speak openly. Just before lunch, Maria passed by the boardroom and noticed the door slightly ajar. She heard Langston's voice inside, sharp and commanding as usual. "We need to shut this down before it gains any more traction," he said. "I don't care who I have to fire to make it happen." Maria's breath hitched, and she moved quickly down the hall before she could be spotted. Langston knew something was brewing, and he was ready to crush it. By the time the board meeting began that afternoon, the tension in the building was almost unbearable. Maria kept to the lower floors, pretending to mop floors and wipe down surfaces, while her mind raced. She pictured Bennett and the others presenting their evidence, standing up to Langston in front of the board. She wondered if they would succeed, or if Langston's power and influence would be enough to silence them. An hour into the meeting, Maria heard raised voices echoing down the hallway. She moved closer to the boardroom, her heart pounding as she strained to hear. Langston's voice was loud and angry, but she couldn't make out his words. Then she heard Bennett, calm but firm, countering him. The sound of a chair scraping against the floor made her jump, and she quickly ducked into an empty office. From there, she could see Langston storming out of the boardroom, his face red with fury. He muttered something under his breath, then disappeared down the hall. Maria waited until the coast was clear before stepping out. Her pulse was racing, her mind spinning with questions. What had just happened in that room? And more importantly, what would happen next? She didn't have to wait long to find out. Moments later, Bennett stepped out of the boardroom, his expression a mix of relief and determination. He spotted Maria and walked over, lowering his voice so no one else could hear. "It's not over yet," he said, "but we've got Langston cornered. The board's calling an emergency session tomorrow to vote on his removal. It's going to be messy, but we've got the upper hand now." Maria nodded, her chest tight with anticipation. The climax was just around the corner, and everything was riding on what happened next. Maria didn't expect to be pulled into the whirlwind again so soon. After Bennett's update, she had hoped for a quiet evening, a moment to catch her breath before the storm that would undoubtedly come with the board's emergency vote. But as she gathered her things and prepared to leave for the night, she received a text from Bennett. "Asterisk, we have a problem. Meet us in the conference room." Asterisk. Her heart sank. What now? She hurried back to the hidden conference room, where the group had been meeting. When she arrived, the atmosphere was tense, almost suffocating. Bennett, Miss Clark, and the others were already there, huddled around Miss Harper's laptop. The expressions on their faces were grim. "What's going on?" Maria asked, stepping inside and closing the door behind her. Bennett looked up, his jaw tight. "Langston's fighting back. Hard." Miss Clark turned the laptop toward Maria, showing her a series of emails. They were internal memos, but the tone was unmistakable, threatening, manipulative, and full of promises to loyalists. Langston had sent messages to key board members and high-ranking executives, offering lucrative bonuses, promotions, and even shares in hidden accounts if they sided with him in the upcoming vote. It was a desperate but calculated move to buy their loyalty. Maria's stomach churned as she read through the messages. Can he do that? Just bribe people like this? He's not even trying to hide it, Miss Harper said, her voice laced with frustration. He knows it's unethical, but he doesn't care. He's banking on the fact that the board won't act fast enough to stop him. If enough people side with him, we lose. The room fell silent, the weight of the situation pressing down on everyone. Maria felt a sinking realization. Langston wasn't just fighting for his position. He was fighting to keep his secrets buried, and he was willing to drag the entire company down with him if that's what it took. What can we do? Maria asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Bennett exchanged a look with Ms. Clark before turning back to Maria. We need more leverage. The documents and the USB drive are strong, but they're not enough to convince everyone. Langston's been playing this game a long time, and he knows how to spin things in his favor. If we're going to win, we need something undeniable, something he can't talk his way out of. Maria swallowed hard. You mean, I have to go back into his office? Bennett hesitated before nodding. It's risky, but it's our best shot. Langston's been in overdrive since the board meeting. If he's hiding something bigger, he'll have it locked away in that office. Maria felt a chill run down her spine. The thought of going back into Langston's office, especially now when tensions were at their peak, made her stomach turn. But she also knew that she was the only one who could do it. Langston didn't see her as a threat, and that was her advantage. I'll do it, she said, her voice steadier than she felt, but I'll need a plan. The group worked quickly, mapping out Maria's next move. They would wait until Langston left the building, which usually happened late in the evening. Maria would use her cleaning rounds as cover, just as before, but this time she would have a small toolkit to help her access any locked drawers or cabinets. Ms. Clark handed her a slim, portable scanner to copy any documents she found, and Bennett gave her a burner phone with a direct line to the group in case anything went wrong. As the clock ticked toward midnight, Maria found herself standing outside Langston's office once again. The building was eerily quiet, the only sounds the faint hum of fluorescent lights and the occasional creak of the old air conditioning system. Her palms were sweaty as she pushed her cart through the doorway, her eyes scanning the room for anything unusual. Langston's desk was immaculate, as always, but Maria's instincts told her there was more to find. She started with the drawers, carefully unlocking them with the tools Miss Clark had given her. Inside, she found the usual assortment of office supplies and files, but nothing incriminating. Then she noticed something. Her frustration grew as the bookshelf against the far wall didn't sit flush against the floor. The bottom edge was slightly raised, as if something was hidden beneath it. Maria's heart raced as she crouched down, her fingers feeling along the edges until she found a small latch. With a quiet click, a hidden panel slid open, revealing a safe. Maria's breath caught. This was it. Whatever Langston was hiding had to be in there. She fumbled with the tools, her hands shaking as she worked to crack the safe's combination lock. It was painstakingly slow, each click echoing loudly in her ears. She felt exposed, as if Langston could walk in at any moment. Finally, the safe door swung open, revealing a stack of files and an external hard drive. Maria's eyes widened as she skimmed the labels on the files. They contained records of illegal transactions, detailed logs of his offshore accounts, and even contracts outlining deals with questionable third parties. This was more than enough to bury Langston for good. She quickly scanned the documents and copied the files onto the burner phone storage, her heart pounding in her chest. Just as she finished, she heard a noise outside the office, a faint but unmistakable sound of footsteps. Maria froze, her pulse racing. Someone was coming. She hurriedly closed the safe and slid the panel back into place, trying to make it look as if nothing had been disturbed. Grabbing her cart, she pushed it toward the door just as the footsteps grew louder. As she stepped into the hallway, she saw Emily rounding the corner, her face pale and drawn. Their eyes met, and for a moment, Maria thought she had been caught. But Emily didn't say anything. Instead, she danced around nervously before hurrying off in the opposite direction. Maria stood there for a moment, her mind racing. Emily knew something. The fear in her eyes was unmistakable. Whatever was happening behind the scenes was bigger than anyone had realized, and Langston wasn't the only one hiding secrets. Maria's mission was far from over. If anything, the stakes had just gotten even higher. The boardroom was filled with a tense, palpable energy the next morning. The emergency session had drawn every key player in the company, from board members to senior executives. Even the usually indifferent staff lingered nearby, their curiosity barely hidden. Everyone knew that today's meeting would either mark the end of Langston's reign or cement his control indefinitely. Maria sat in a quiet corner of the break room, her hands clutching her phone tightly. Bennett had assured her that the evidence she gathered was enough to expose Langston completely, but there was still the matter of delivering it. The stakes were too high for her to feel any sense of relief yet. She knew that if Langston suspected her involvement, there would be no going back. Minutes before the meeting began, Bennett sent her a text. Asterisk, it's happening now. Stay close. Asterisk. Maria's pulse quickened. She paced the room, trying to focus on the sounds of people shuffling into the boardroom down the hall. She thought about Emily and the fear she'd seen in her eyes the night before. Maria hadn't told Bennett about their encounter. Something about Emily's expression made Maria hesitate. Was Emily afraid of Langston? Or was she hiding something else entirely? Inside the boardroom, the meeting began with Langston in his usual commanding position at the head of the table. He wore an air of confidence, his sharp suit and steely gaze giving the impression of a man fully in control. His voice carried through the room as he opened the session, addressing the board with his typical bravado. Let's cut to the chase, Langston said, leaning forward. I've heard whispers of discontent, and I know some of you have been misled by unfounded accusations. But let me assure you, my leadership has always been in the best interests of this company. Any claims to the contrary are baseless and frankly insulting. Bennett stood, holding a thick folder of documents and the USB drive Maria had retrieved. With all due respect, Mr. Langston, this is about more than leadership style. We've uncovered evidence that points to serious misconduct, fraud, embezzlement, and violations that threaten not only your reputation, but the company's survival. Langston's face darkened, but he kept his composure. These are heavy accusations, Bennett. I hope you have something substantial to back them up. Miss Clark began projecting the evidence onto the room's large screen, walking the board through each piece with precision. The memos, financial discrepancies, and offshore accounts painted a damning picture. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the room as the board members began to realize the extent of Langston's deception. Langston, however, didn't falter. This is nothing but a smear campaign, he said, his voice cold and steady. Anyone can fabricate numbers and create a narrative. I trust the board will see through this desperate attempt to undermine me. But then Miss Clark pulled up the final piece of evidence, emails and contracts from the hidden safe. The documents revealed Langston's direct involvement in illegal deals and bribes to silence dissent. His signature was on every page, undeniable proof of his guilt. Langston's confidence faltered for the first time. He stood abruptly, his chair screeching against the floor. This is ridiculous, he shouted. This is a coordinated attack by a group of disgruntled employees who want to see me fail. Before anyone could respond, the door to the boardroom swung open. Emily stepped inside, her face pale but determined. The room fell silent as all eyes turned to her. She clutched a manila envelope in her hands, her fingers trembling slightly. I have something to that, she said, her voice clear but shaky. She placed the envelope on the table and opened it, pulling out a stack of papers. These are copies of emails and agreements that Langston forced me to draft. I kept them as a precaution, and now I see why. Langston's face turned ashen. Emily, what are you doing? He hissed. I'm doing what I should have done a long time ago, she said firmly. I can't keep covering for you. Not anymore. The room erupted into chaos as board members demanded explanations, their voices overlapping in confusion and anger. Langston, realizing his position was crumbling, tried to leave, but security had already been summoned. Within minutes, he was escorted out of the building, his protests echoing down the hall. Back in the break room, Maria let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Bennett appeared moments later, his expression a mix of relief and exhaustion. "It's over," he said, sitting down across from her. "Langston's out, and the board's taking immediate action to stabilize the company." Maria felt a wave of emotions, relief, pride, and a strange sense of disbelief. She had played a part in taking down a man who had seemed untouchable. But just as she began to relax, Bennett leaned in closer. "There's one more thing," he said, his voice low. "Emily's testimony was key, but she mentioned something off the record, something about Langston having a partner. Someone higher up who might have been pulling the strings all along." Maria's eyes widened. "You mean this isn't over?" Bennett nodded grimly. "We won this battle, but there's still a lot we don't know. And if Langston was working with someone else, they're not going to sit quietly." Maria's heart sank. Just when she thought the nightmare was over, it seemed a new one was beginning. She had stepped into a world of power, corruption, and secrets, and there was no turning back now.